All right. Good afternoon, Doug. Today we're going to talk about the Canadian Freedom Convoy. These truckers that are, you know, locking down essentially Ottawa. Traveling across Canada. And there's apparently 50,000 or so trucks that are involved with this. Although the press, the information from the press is very hard to come by. With real specifics. Just curious, I guess, what your thoughts are about what's actually going on there right now. What do you know, and what do you think about it?
Well, how much does anybody know actually? Because the reporting from the media is sketchy and unreliable and very limited in the case of anything that is anti-establishment, like these truckers apparently are. So frankly, not being on the ground in Ottawa or on those cold, windblown Canadian prairies, I mean, I don't know what's actually going on. All I know is what I pick up from the occasional blog or whatever,
Yeah.
emails Canadians
Yeah.
send. But okay, so we got 50,000 trucks, big trucks mostly, I guess, in Ottawa. And Ottawa, I mean, there's no reason to live in Ottawa unless you're a Canadian government employee. So they picked the right target. I mean, the people in Ottawa hate them. Hopefully they're actually going to put that horrible city under embargo, and the shelves will all get empty, and the local government employees will be inconvenienced. So I'm all for the truckers. Anyway, I like truckers just as a general rule because they're
Yeah.
like they're like the modern day cowboys. Is who truckers are.
Yeah, and I think that's that specifically is worth digging into a little more because, with all the shit that's gone on in the last 2 years, and nobody really in North America responding to any of this in any substantial way, except for finally the truckers. What is it about the makeup of these truckers that makes it so that they're doing this, that they're actually doing something at substantial expense to them? Just drive a big rig from Vancouver to Ottawa probably costs you $6,000 in fuel. I mean, it's expensive to do. So these people are taking on a lot of expense to make this happen.
Exactly. Plus lost income in addition to the actual hard expenses. So they're very serious. I think that truckers as an actual intellectual force are underrated, especially since the invention of the cassette player and the CD player now, because, like everybody else, all those truckers have heard every rock and roll song 1,000 times, every single one of them 1,000 times. And you get tired of that after a while. And I think a lot of these guys are listening to tapes and CDs and whatnot about intellectual subjects. So they're much, much better educated than the average office worker because they've got like 8 hours a day to listen to interesting stuff. How about that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think they are. People underestimate how educated they actually are and how up on current events they actually are because the best case scenario, I guess maybe somebody's totally utilizing their time. They're doing some teaching company courses, learning about astrophysics or something while driving their truck, which they could do. Or in the worst case scenario, they're like listening to talk radio all day and at least up on all the jockeying and political events and all this nonsense. But they're much more informed than your average person is because, as you said, they have this 8 hours a day to dedicate to thinking and learning about new things and taking in information. Whereas most people who are working, in the office or whatever, or even if you're, a construction worker, like you don't have that time where your mind is still free to be able to think and explore ideas that these guys actually have.
Exactly. And sharing that and a common occupation, and carrying on the tradition of cowboys, which they do, they tend to think alike and act together. I'll tell you what surprises me. It's that it happened in Canada first, because, from the very beginning, when Americans during the Revolution, the American Revolution, went, the people that didn't want to see the US separate from Britain, a lot of them went up to Canada. And that started kind of a tradition where they're more conventional, more conservative, kind of nicer than Americans. And they still have that tradition. So I wouldn't have thought it would have started in Canada. I'm surprised.
Yeah, I wonder if it's because it's more homogenous actually in the among the truck drivers themselves. There's like a lot of the truck drivers in the US are not, they're not a bunch of Albertans, you know what I mean? There's a lot of immigrants who take those jobs because the wages have been pushed down and down. There's been huge pressure on that. And there's a huge shortages. I mean, I personally know 3 former long haul truck drivers who abandoned that profession years ago because they just get squeezed out of it. It's really hard on them, and so they got pushed out of it. So, and I think immigrants have taken it.
I understand that a long haul trucker can, and of course you're better off if you're a husband and wife team, because then you can get around how many hours a day you can drive and all that easier. And you sleep in the back of the truck in the cubby hole back. That a trucker can make 80 grand or more a year now. So which is it? Are they making nothing or making a lot?
Well, it depends upon this. It depends upon specifically the route that they're doing, actually, because there's been lots of new regulations about the number of hours that they can drive, and they spend a lot of time that they do not get paid, where they're maybe waiting at a loading dock. They don't get paid for any of that. They don't get paid when the stuff's moving. So if things are not functioning well, if they're not in the right spot, I guess they can actually get. I mean, I've had. I mean, one person specifically complained to me about the idea, of course, the lifestyle. They don't want to be away from your family every night for, most nights, don't like that. But I think that for a young person, then it can make a lot of sense. But I think there's a point where it gets harder. But if you don't have a good route and you end up getting, you end up waiting, at one of the ports, for instance, to pick up stuff. And, you don't get paid for that time. You only get paid when you got a load, and then also you can only drive for whatever it is, it's 8 hours a day or some, there's only a certain number of hours. And so if you're in the middle of nowhere, you got to drive 8. And then by regulations, you have to pull over to the side and stop. Now those regulations have actually been there for a while, but they added all these GPS systems to the trucks so they can actually track it. So they actually know if you're violating it now. Before you could fudge it a little bit, which, that's how the hardworking aspirational people got ahead of it. So I think there's some money to be made in it, but
yeah. So they're being impinged upon by regulation. They don't like that. So yeah, I think that there's a tendency, much more than somebody just sitting in a cubicle all day, to be rather freedom oriented and free market minded. So,
yeah,
okay, that's great. And they're making the bureaucrats in Ottawa, their lives miserable. And the bureaucrats, the Canadian government realizes that they've already got a problem, which they'll really feel in Ottawa because nothing can get in or out of the city easily because the truckers aren't working to start with, and they're blocking the roads and making it harder yet. So, so they're trying to fine them like huge amounts. And I guess there's penalties other than that, but to put them in jail, you're making the problem worse. So what's the government in Canada going to do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's what there are 2 interesting things that happened. One is that Trudeau, first knowing that they were coming, said he had a contact with COVID and had to go into isolation for 5 days, he just basically went to go hide under the bed. And then when it became clear that it was going to last beyond that 5-day window, they evac'd him out to a secure location. So what a coward. I mean, what an amazing coward he is, and not being able, it just shows how.
Such a little chicken shit. I mean, it's unbelievable. His father, well, I don't know if Pierre is really his father or not. There are all kinds of rumors to the effect that that's actually not the case because his mother was a notorious tramp. I'm not sure it's politically, a promiscuous male is admired as a great swordsman. a promiscuous female. It's seen as a slut or a tramp. So this is a subject for another politically incorrect conversation sometime, perhaps how this bifurcation arose. But whoever Pierre's father is, what I find disturbing is that Canadians voted him into office. So for whatever reason, uh, the average Canadian is at least as stupid as the average American that voted in Biden and Obama and Clinton and God knows who else in office. And
Yep.
Bush,
Yep.
that stupid baby Bush.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Exactly. And but there's something about again the truckers that makes it different for them. And just one of the characteristics I thought of a second ago, it's worth talking about, is that a lot of them are totally independent. Meaning they don't work for a large company. They own their own truck. They're independent contractors, so they're running their own business. So they have a lot more responsibility over their own income and their own profession, really, or their own work day to day than most people do. And so that they have a disposition toward responsibility because they have real consequences from these policies that are being implemented, and they feel like because they're used to carrying the burden of responsibility that it's up to them, that they have to do something. They must fix their situation. It's not going to be fixed for them in some way. And there's a large group, so that makes them more independent. Makes sense why they would react the way that they have as compared to the average Canadian and the average American, which basically just go back home and turn on Netflix and order some Uber Eats.
Well, I suppose the Canadian government feels some kind of reflexive obligation to do something. Governments always have to do something, but I don't know that that'll really work because from a class point of view, cops are basically the same kind of blue collar background as the truckers are. And they're kind of, in a way, brothers under the skin. So they understand, the cops will understand based on their wages and all kinds of things. They're not going to want to arrest these truckers or even harass them or ticket them. So that's kind of an interesting thing. And if the Canadian government calls in the army, it's going to be the same thing with the army, I think. So
well, and what can they really do? I mean, there's too many of them. There's too many
yeah,
people, so you cannot arrest them all. They'll outnumber the cops. I mean, you can't arrest them, and then
yeah.
and also even if you can't bring out the water cannons, that stuff that they would normally do in these crowd control situations, because there's just a basic problem of physics. Like you can't move all the mass that they have parked in front of Parliament. It cannot be moved on its own.
And maybe things, not just in Canada and the US, but all over the world, have reached a critical mass where maybe the people that we'd consider right thinking are a minority. In fact, we are definitely a minority. I'm not talking about libertarians, we're only a rounding error. But let's just say commonsensical people that like to try to think for themselves. Well, we're only 30% of the population at most. I'm being optimistic. But maybe we've just been pushed far enough. And we actually want to do something. I mean, the deep state, it's a real thing. It exists. We could talk about who the deep state is sometime in the future. But maybe this is time for really pushing back. I don't know. I don't think it'll turn into a revolution of any type, but I don't know. Do you have any feeling as how this will evolve?
Well, I mean, the way that they're handling it is interesting so far. I mean, there are two thoughts I had. One is, I don't know if you saw this, but there was the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation had one of their talking heads on, saying that it was likely that there was Russian involvement in this Freedom Convoy. I swear to God, and it's like they're so not creative and trying to come up with solutions that are like explanations. It's like, really, the Russians?
Like, how stupid do they really think people are?
Well, I mean, I think they think people are really stupid, and most of the last couple of years has probably just been total confirmation bias to that for them. because
Yeah,
people have behaved pretty stupidly. But so they're doing that, and then they're not covering it, or they're minimizing what's actually happening by saying that it's for other reasons, and
yeah,
then they're painting them as right wingers, and they're trying the normal stuff, and none of it seems to be sticking because they seem like they're, for the most part, salt of the earth people who are out there. Like I saw pictures of them like cleaning one of the statues for some Canadian Olympic hero in Ottawa. They're like cleaning it instead of tearing it down. They're like polishing it.
right.
They're picking up garbage, things like that. So it's hard to really vilify these people.
Well, and what really lit the fuse, I guess, for this was the vax mandates. Now, as we found when we talked to, well, we were talking before the show started about the fact that our friend Jake Ducey, who's got a very nice podcast, had me on, and I did a few minutes on the vaccines, and that alone was enough to have YouTube give him a strike, as they call it, and take down that particular podcast. So it could be that the silver lining to this cloud of vaccines and vaccine mandates is some people have just had enough. And that's the fire that's that's lit the fuse to the powder keg, that'll lead to the powder keg.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I hope that, you know, I hope, I mean, it's really good to see this happening, what's happening. But, I'm always concerned about the downside of everything. One of the biggest things that I worried about right away was just like how January 6th was turned into this. I mean, you've seen the way they've been riding that horse, since then. And you can imagine like what a false flag event in Ottawa would do to totally end this in a heartbeat and then change the narrative completely. And, you know, so when I saw that they moved Trudeau to a secure location, I was like, I would like be on high alert for people misbehaving, at an event like that. So
Mhm.
that's one of the big worries I had, is that could totally change the narrative so fast to the other side, just like January 6th did. I mean, they nipped all that in the bud so fast by putting these people in solitary confinement and charging grandmas with all kinds of stuff. So they
Yeah,
could do that here.
or maybe that will just piss them off a lot, and both sides will try to take it to the next level. But see, I think that will happen eventually because we're still waiting for the financial markets to come unglued. And when that happens, that's going to result in chaos. We're still waiting for a social credit system to be implemented in the US and Canada. There's all kinds of things that could happen. So we're still at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, and the other potential downside of this is that, obviously without these trucks, and this is, I think, if it is 50,000 trucks, then that apparently is something like 15% of the total in Canada. Okay, but that means that a lot of stuff's not being delivered anywhere. And if people are worried about shortages, or if they were experiencing any shortages before, they must, they're going to be really bad in a week or 2 weeks if any of this continues, and it's going to be a problem, and that could turn public sentiment really against the truckers and against this whole, they could paint them, if they start using the terrorist version of it, of this, saying is hurting people, basically, starving people because they're not doing their thing. And I just don't see how they have to either admit defeat, probably Trudeau resign, and and basically they end all the mandates, or else it's going to keep, you think pressure is just going to keep building, because they've drawn a pretty clear line about what they want. The truckers have just end all mandates around the coronavirus stuff at all of them.
Yeah, it's an unstable, fluid situation that's potentially explosive. I can't make a prediction as to what's going to happen. Anything could happen depending on who does something stupid. I mean,
Yeah.
but I'm glad that the truckers are there. So I'm 100% behind the truckers.
100%, 100%.
I
I
just
agree.
don't, I just don't know if it'll be, because look at the yellow vests in France. I mean, that was a big deal for a while. Then it all kind of dried up and blew away, and you don't hear about it anymore.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that was they didn't have well, that was really getting explosive, with lots of, I mean, they were bringing out the water cannons and tear gas every weekend. And it was like a Friday night thing or Saturday thing, in France for months. But, I think the difference with the truckers is that they park a lot of mass, and they actually, from a tactical basis, they actually change the battlefield completely, you know what I mean? In a way that no one else could do because of just the mass that they can drop there. So it basically takes away all the crowd control measures that the police normally have to get people out of there. It provides a different symbol when people look at the pictures of it, because you don't associate those things with you can't say those trucks are bad. No one looks at it and goes they're bad, but you can look at these rioters where they're go throwing stuff at the police or setting stuff on fire, and then the police are sending tear gas at them, and it's confusing to know. It's not clear, good guy, bad guy, Oh, trucks parked there doing nothing except holding Canada flags and picking up garbage. It's really hard. As much the optics of that are bad, and they can't move them out of the way for the government. So I think it's a totally different situation. It's a really smart approach, actually. But my worry is that most of these natural movements, I think this was the same thing with the what do you call it, the Wall Street in 2007 and 8, the guys who were protesting Wall Street. I can't remember what it's called, but with those guys, like that movement where they were like, end the Fed.
Occupy Wall Street. Was that it?
Occupy Wall Street. Yes, Occupy Wall Street. Yeah, which was basically an end the Fed kind of movement, where anti-bank, end the Fed kind of stuff. And which was actually much more global than people realize. I was in Hong Kong at the time, and there were people in Hong Kong protesting there, in the same way, in Occupy Wall Street. So, but that movement got hijacked very quickly. So it's like these natural movements that occur, what happens is like someone else like hops in the saddle and it steers it in a different direction. And that's what I would worry about with this, is that it just turns into something that it isn't, that it's wholesome and it's in what they're trying to do. And I worry it gets hijacked and those people end up finding themselves, in real risk.
Exactly. And we have to remember that the bad guys own and control the apparatus of the state. They have essentially unlimited funding, a lot of power, and most people support them. Evidence being that people like Trudeau are popularly elected, presumably.
Yeah.
Well,
there's one. So let me just run one quote by you before we wrap up here on this topic. We'll see how it actually works out. But I don't know if you saw Trudeau's speech before the truckers arrived. He was basically calling these guys a fringe minority. I don't know if you saw that or not. But there was Elon Musk tweeted. I know a lot of people don't like Elon for a bunch of reasons, but you got to admire the brilliance here. He says, quote, "It would appear that the so-called fringe minority is actually the government."
Yeah, since Elon did that interview with the Babylon Bee, I was always a fan of him just because he's a genius. He actually does things. I mean, he puts rockets in space. He's built a car. Yes, I know funding probably came from the government, but what do you want? Anyway, he's definitely got a libertarian psychology, which is absolutely not true of people like Gates and the rest of them.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, we'll see where this trucker thing goes. I mean, if there's more to the story as it develops, then we'll be back talking about it again. And obviously, if you have any viewers, you have comments on this, we'd love to hear them. So in the video, please add your comments, what your thoughts are on the situation in Canada and why nothing like that has happened in the United States yet. I'd be very interested to hear people's thoughts on that.
Yes, exactly. I'd love to hear what our subscribers who are closer to having actual boots on the ground have to say. What do you see? Yeah,
what do you see?
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Doug.
Thanks, Matt.